Hello and welcome to Reading the Gospels Together, and today we're back on solid ground with John chapter 8 verse 12 onwards after our previous session's brief visit to Luke in John chapter 8 verses 1 through 11. And we're not only back in John, we still find ourselves with Jesus in Jerusalem at the Feast of the Tabernacles, where we last left Jesus in chapter 7. Now remember from a couple of sessions ago how Jesus, using the image of the ceremonial pouring of the water to bring the blessing of God with the winter rains, and he said to the people, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, rivers of living water will flow from them." And in today's reading, Jesus will again use the symbolism of the Feast of Tabernacles to teach us more about himself. So again, a bit of background. As part of the festivities, especially on the last night, 4 huge golden lamps were put in place, and an abundance of oil was poured into these large golden bowls, and the lamps rose over the outside walls of the temple, and they were said to illumine the entire city of Jerusalem. Now, I've never been in Jerusalem for Sukkot. I know they still do this today, but I have been there for Hanukkah, and there's a huge Hanukkah menorah which brings light, or Hanukkah, not a menorah, which brings light to the whole city. So it must have been the same as that. When those lamps were lit, that was the celebration, the sign for the celebration to begin. Thousands of people danced with torches and sang songs of praise, and there were Levites playing their instruments. They were standing on the steps or in the temple. The dancing and the singing lasted all night until dawn. It must have been quite an event. Now, what was the significance of the light? Well, remember, this is the Feast of the Tabernacles, which commemorates the temporary shelters, or these sukkahs, in which people lived while they were wandering the desert, having escaped the Egyptian army with the parting of the Red Sea and being led finally all the way to the Promised Land. Now, we're told that God lit the way for the people with a pillar of fire by night. Eventually, hundreds of years later, when Solomon built the temple, the light of God would descend upon the temple when the people were finally settled in the land. So the massive lights during the feast were a symbol of the light of God, the guidance of God into freedom, and the presence of God over the temple, bringing light and salvation to the whole city. But wait, there's more. Remember that while our reading was interrupted by the woman caught in adultery story, chapter 7 with its imagery of water ran right into chapter 8 with its imagery of light. And what does Psalm 36 say? One of the very psalms which would be sung at the festival. Well, listen. "How priceless is your unfailing love, O God! People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light." And here's Jesus telling us that he is both the fountain of life and the true source of all light. Jesus is the very embodiment of the priceless, unfailing love of God. Now, also familiar to us, and certainly to Jesus' listeners, is the song, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." Now, Jesus, in saying that he is the light, is also identified here as the Word, the very title that John gives to Jesus in his opening chapter. Of course, for John, Jesus is the light which shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it, as John says in chapter 1, or as Jesus says here, "I am the light of the world. The one who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." This verse is the central point of John's whole presentation of his gospel, the contrast between the light of faith and the darkness of unbelief. Now, even more significantly, Jesus here identifies himself as the light of the world. Remember, we said that those great Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles lights, were said to illumine the whole city of Jerusalem, symbolically bringing light to all the Jewish people. But Jesus here goes one step further. "I am the light of the world," he says, "the whole world." Now, as a result of these Feast of Tabernacles sermons, John says, even as he spoke, many believed in him. But not everybody. The Pharisees, that we're told, challenged Jesus. Here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. Or in other words, you're saying these things about yourself. Why should we believe you? Jesus' response is, oh, it's not just me. I have two people who testify. I have me and I have God. Well, maybe not surprisingly, this answer does not satisfy his critics. Who are you? They ask. And Jesus' sad answer in verse 28 is that they won't understand until he is lifted up, that is, both crucified and resurrected. Well, the argument continues until finally Jesus' opponents accuse him of being a Samaritan and demon-possessed, the biggest insults they can come up with. That gives you a bit of a clue as to how Samaritans were viewed in New Testament days. Jesus responds, I'm not possessed by a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly, I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death. Now, his opponents point out, even the most righteous people have died. Abraham, for instance, all the prophets. Are you greater than Abraham, they ask Jesus? Who do you think you are? Now, at the beginning of the chapter, they were asking, who are you? Now they're asking, who do you think you are? That's a different question altogether. Things are heating up. They reach a boiling point in the last two verses of the chapter. Very truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Now, at this we read, they picked up stones to stone him, to kill him. But Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. What was it that Jesus said to set them off so violently? Suddenly, they're unafraid of the crowd or the consequences. They're ready to stone him to death there and then. And they would have done had not Jesus managed somehow to hide himself and slip away. Well, a bit of Hebrew would be helpful here. Not only is Jesus saying that he pre-existed Abraham, and Abraham was about 2,000 years born 2,000 years before the events we're reading in the New Testament. But Jesus says, before Abraham was born, I am. Now, the grammar there sounds odd to our ears. We would say, I was born before Abraham, or before Abraham was born, I was born. But Jesus says, before Abraham was born, I am. And that prompted a murderous reaction. Because I am, in Hebrew, is Yahweh, the name which God gave when Moses asked God's name. Who shall I say is sending me? Moses asked God, and God said, Yahweh, I am. Jesus, in saying before Abraham was born, I am, is unequivocally identifying himself with God. And this was simply to Jesus' opponents a blasphemy deserving death. It's the same phrase which Jesus uses at his arrest and trial, which is all the high priest needed to hear, tearing his robes as a sign of grief that anyone should blaspheme so. And it is blasphemy, unless it's true. A truth which can only be understood with the light which comes from God, the light of understanding. And we'll see in chapter 9 how Jesus brings light even to the blind. We'll see you then.